Perhaps you've noticed that you have a little red thread attached to your bulletins today. At least I hope you noticed, or we're all going to have your eyes checked. The reading I'd like to share with you is called The Way It Is. It's a poem by William Stafford. It talks about a thread. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread.
Reading from the 13th chapter of Luke. Just then, some Pharisees came to Jesus and said, "You need to get out of town and fast. Herod is trying to kill you." Jesus replied, "Go and tell that fox. Today and tomorrow I'll be casting out devils and healing people, and on the third day I'll reach my goal. Even with all that, I'll need to continue on my journey today, tomorrow, and the day after that, since no prophet can be allowed to die anywhere except in Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you kill the prophets and stone those who are sent to you. How often I have wanted to gather your children together as a mother bird collects her babies under her wings, yet you refused me."
Would you pray with me? Divine Essence, help us to let go of our to-do lists and our worries and our concerns for a few moments, that we might focus on your message for us today, even if it doesn't come through my words, that your essence, your presence might touch us in some way that helps us to get through the next days, the next weeks, to make our life more whole, more intact, more fulfilled. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be full of your wisdom and your insight. Amen. So sometimes I think that we don't really think about how tough Jesus probably had it for those couple of years of his ministry. I don't know if it's the distance of 2,000 years, and so we've sort of sanitized the experience of Jesus, or we've pedestalized him. I don't know if that's a word, but it sounds like it should be. Put him up on a pedestal and made everything just easy and grandiose. I don't know if it's the fact that the church has turned him into someone who was, sinless and perfect, and so therefore how could he have had a really rough time, The fact that he was God to the church. Certainly things must have come easy for him. Is sort of all those things put together make me think that we've forgotten that I think life was really, really tough for him. That it wasn't as easy as we might like to have think perhaps it was. Certainly he was clear about his mission. He was passionate about bringing to people a deeper understanding of the divine, a connection to God that was beyond ritual and dogma and doctrine. It was a one-to-one connection deep inside one's soul that he was trying to facilitate with people. But he butted up against wall after wall after wall to do it. And in addition to trying to do that, he was a champion of the poor and the oppressed and the outcast and the marginalized. And again, he hit wall after wall in trying to help those folks. Sometimes I wonder if, that time in the wilderness that we talked about last week, that time of perhaps preparing for this crazy ministry he would have, I wonder how much of it was a struggle. A personal struggle for him, a questioning, a doubting, a confusion. I don't know any pastor who's gone into the ministry who hasn't had that time of thinking, what on earth am I even considering? Because it's going to take so much change and so much dedication, and it really means one's entire life. And am I crazy? Did he go through those sorts of struggles and concerns, and yet came out of it, as many of us who went into the ministry did, knowing that, well, I'm not going to be able to run from it, so I may as well go with it. Here we go, both feet in, and then trying to live true to that deep spiritual calling. Just for fun, let's see if we can name some of the struggles that Jesus was up against. If we really put ourselves in his place for a little bit, what did he have to use the word of the day, what did he have to persevere through? The hierarchy. The Jewish hierarchy that he was butting heads against to say, hey, this is supposed to be about spirituality, not about your nice little rules, right? All right, who else? Or what else?
Poverty. I mean, he wasn't a rich man.
Poverty, absolutely. In his own right, he had to deal, he wasn't concerned with, alone with everybody else's poverty and what had made them poor, but the fact that he was leading a movement and had nothing. Politics. Any specific politics you want to?
Well, he had the Roman politics, the politics of the Jewish leadership, and the politics of all the other religious leaders that were there at the time.
Right, so the politics of the Roman authorities, who were in bed with the Jewish authorities, and all of the political stuff that was going on, that he was butting heads against. Good. The cluelessness of his disciples. How many times did he say, do you not yet understand? He needed one of those little emojis with the hand on his forehead, right? What?
Instead of inclusiveness, he was fighting against the area.
Exclusive.
He was fighting against, Julie said, the uninclusiveness of the area, the biases, the prejudices, and so forth. Sure. Charlie? Hunger. Yeah. Maybe he went to bed without food sometimes. He talks about not having a place to lay your head or food to eat. Those people didn't help him out. And not only his own, but he had people that were following him, right? So he had to be concerned with not only what he was going to eat, but here these people had given their lives to help be part of his ministry. And he needed to worry about feeding them and where they were going to sleep. Go ahead. What else?
Just fear.
Fear.
Knowing what was ahead and was looking towards it.
Knowing that, certainly in this scripture, it's clear that he knew that he was putting his foot in some really difficult places, and that there was a price on his head, right? And yet he continued to go forward. So, Mike? Death.
During and then to the ultimate end.
Sure.
Understanding that, to the fear factor.
Yeah. For the fear of, we get that one little glimpse of his humanity in the Garden of Gethsemane where he says, God, if this cup could be taken from me, could you just take it away? Because I'm really not sure I want to do this. Yeah. How many towns do you think he got kicked out of? All of them. Probably a lot of them. And what do you think his relatives thought of him? You know, there's one little line in Mark that says that his relatives thought he was crazy. There's not much attention given to that, and that's right before his mother and brothers come to see him. And we get the mothers and brothers story in the other Gospels, but everybody else drops that one line about, hey, my relatives thought he was crazy. But there's really a sense that he did not have the full support of his family in doing this. So there's a lot. And I'm sure we haven't even unpacked half of it that he persevered through. You know, we're talking about the ways of Jesus throughout Lent, right? And the things that he's giving us a good example about. And this is one of them, the way of perseverance, because he had it. So let's name some of the things that we persevere through. Perhaps especially in the last couple of years. The pandemic and everything that goes with it. What else?
Politics.
Politics, again.
Loss of loved ones.
Loss of loved ones, death, grief. Connie?
Aging bodies.
I'm sorry?
Aging
Bodies, yes. I didn't want to hear that one. I think that was my... yes, so our health and getting older. Fear. Uncertainty. Mark?
The economy.
The economy, yeah. Fear again.
Mental health.
Mental health. Pandemic has taken its toll, certainly.
Isolation probably for a lot of people during the pandemic.
Isolation, loneliness. Some of us are dealing with aging parents. Some of us are dealing with kids and what's going on in the school systems and bullying and all kinds of things. There's war. There's still poverty. Illness. There's so much that we probably don't even think about the concept that we're persevering through anything, because we just do. We go through one step at a time, one day at a time, knowing that we need to get through, and some days we get through better than others. But perseverance, the way of perseverance, is not simply a way of life, it's a way of our spiritual selves, our spiritual being. And the question becomes, how can we get through as best we can get through? What gives us the strength to get through? I think for Jesus it was probably clear for all of us that his faith was part of what gave him the strength to get through. That connection he had with God. The fact that he'd go off by himself and do some centering time and some praying time to rejuvenate and to reconnect with God, to have the strength to keep going. You know, everything, not everything, but almost everything I've read, the books that I've been reading, the articles I've been reading, name spirituality as an essential component of resilience and perseverance. And I'm not talking necessarily about religion per se, although some people may find a spiritual connection in going to church. But the kind of spirituality I'm talking about is one in which there's a trust, a deep trust and belief in a connection to something more. Does that make sense? Joan Borisenko says this: it's feeling an authentic connection to a larger intelligence, whether we relate to it as a loving, forgiving God or a universal energy of compassion, encourages what's best in us, providing a true north that orients us when we're lost in a sea of change or desperation. I like that concept of it being a true north for us. It's something that we hang on to. And it brings us back to William Stafford's poem about the thread. Listen to that poem again. It's a short poem, but listen to it again. Understanding the thread is that thing which we hold on to help us persevere. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread. But it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old, Connie. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. Now, I trust that you hear in that metaphor the constant, unchanging presence of the divine essence underneath all things and within us. That's there for us to hang on to give us something that will strengthen us, that will comfort us, that will keep us moving one step at a time, that keeps us from getting spiritually lost. It was clear, it doesn't stop things from happening, doesn't stop time from unfolding, doesn't stop us from having aging skin and older bodies and dealing with sickness from a pandemic or whatever it is. But it's always there to hang on to. It may be hard to see sometimes, hard to feel sometimes, because look how thin that is, how tiny that is. But it's always there. So let me tell you two stories about people for whom that thread helped them to persevere. The first story is about a Norwegian pastor during World War II. He ran sort of an underground railway for Jews and gays and gypsies and those who were being persecuted by the Nazis. And then one day the Gestapo picked him up and brought him in for questioning. It looked like one of those old movies. They put him in the metal chair on the opposite side of a table from the interrogation officer, and they shone a bright, harsh light on him, and the Gestapo who was interrogating him took his Luger out of his holster and put it in his pistol in the middle of the table. And the Norwegian pastor didn't hesitate, but he reached into his satchel and he took out his Bible and he put it in the middle of the table. And the officer said, "What'd you do that for?" And the pastor said, "Well, you took out your weapon and put it on the table, and so did I." Confident that what he was doing was right, having integrity, spiritual integrity to what he was doing. He withstood a very long, difficult interrogation and went back to his church to continue to do what he'd been doing. Second story is about a woman named Maria. Maria had a small stroke the same year that her husband lost his job, and her son went into treatment for meth addiction. She was starting to feel like the proverbial Job, that everything was going wrong all at the same time, and it was all kind of crashing in on her. And while she had disability coming in, there was still that fear that maybe they'd lose their home. With her meditation teacher, she spent time practicing trust and staying in the present moment. And she used prayer beads to focus her mind on those exercises. And she had a mantra that said, rest in the present, heal in the present, trust. And it took time, but eventually she healed from the stroke. Eventually her husband got a new job. Eventually, a year later, her son was still clean and sober. But she said, without trust, she could not have made it through. So both of these people had to persevere through a really difficult time, albeit very different. And they both held onto a thread that got them through. You know, for the pastor, it was the Bible. That was his connection to the thread that helped him to have strength and confidence in what he was doing. And for Maria, the thread was her practice of meditation and her prayer beads that connected her to that presence that is always there but very hard to see. They didn't let go. Jesus stayed connected to the thread in the same way. But you know what? Sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes we hit these crises in life and we need all hands on deck. Both of our hands are working on whatever's going on, and we let go of the thread. And our complete attention and our focus and our lives are dealing with whatever it is that we're struggling with. Whether it's death or illness or our kids addicted to something, whatever it is, sometimes we don't even have the energy to pray, much less hold on to a thread that we can hardly see, for goodness sakes. And then what happens? The thread's still there. It's important to remember that. I talked to two friends this week, both of whom are retired pastors. One of them while they were pastoring, they both had tragic deaths happen in their lives. And one friend lost a 34-year-old daughter to cancer after a couple of years of battling that, seeing her through that. And my other friend lost his wife after an extended illness. And I asked both of them this week, I said, did your faith help you get through? And I got a really long pause on the other end of the line when I asked that to both of them. And they said, boy, that's a really hard question. And part of that reason, the reason that was really hard is that it happened to both of them when they were in the church and serving a church. And honestly, they were not the community that Amanda was trying to portray in her little kids' time. The communities and the hierarchy of the church let them both down. And as a pastor, it's hard sometimes to disconnect faith from church, God from church. So I think that was a significantly difficult thing for them. But as they thought about it, my friend who lost her 34-year-old daughter, she said, you know, at the end of the day, where she found her faith manifest was in the people that were put in her path to help her. The people who were there with grace and with kindness, with help that she didn't ask for, didn't know she needed, because she was too caught up in her grief and her pain and her anger to have asked for anything. And yet she said, you know, for lack of my words, God appeared to her in those people. Those people connected her to the thread. They were holding on even when she couldn't. And then they grabbed hold of her so she wouldn't get lost. Does that make sense? You know, and then my other pastor friend who lost his wife, he said, you know, when he was in the midst of caregiving and trying to keep a job and trying to raise a son, he said he didn't have time to hold on to that thread. But when he could take a break, it was right there. when he could have some time for respite, when he could go for a drive and be alone, said that thread was right there again to help him fill up, to help him get back on course, to be that true north. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is a metaphorical thread, I believe, that flows through all things and around all things and within all things. And that it's there for us, whether we can see it or not. And the challenge becomes that it is so fine and so delicate that we don't always trust it, we don't always see it, we don't always remember it. It can be easy to forget. And it can be hard to describe to others when we do find it, or when we're trying to help others find it. But sometimes we need to persevere in our perseverance, to hang in there. But it's that thread that helps us to not be lost. It's that thread that helps our souls to keep going, no matter what. And so I encourage you to remember the thread is there, to remember to reach out and grab hold. And perhaps sometimes I think we have to practice this when times are good, when life is better, to practice hanging onto the thread and seeing what it feels like, and feeling that strength and feeling that comfort, feeling that confidence and that warmth and that light. So that when times are tough, it's more natural to hold on to that thread. You know, it's kind of like you don't want to learn to ride a bike right before you have a 50-mile trek to go on, right? So we kind of have to practice hanging onto the thread before times get tough. But it's there for each of us. Jesus showed us the way of perseverance. The way is there for each and every one of us. Amen.